Hello, and welcome back to the Nonprofit Leaders Network podcast. Nick Arquette, founder and executive director of Walk with Sally, based in California, will be sharing with us today about leading and growing a team, making the difficult decision to change from a fully volunteer-run organization to having staff, learning life lessons, and impacting the lives of families, especially children impacted by cancer.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Leaders Network podcast, where your host, KIRSTEN Bullock, interviews nonprofit CEOs and executive directors who share what's working. Show notes can be found at nonprofitleadersnetwork.com. Please add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or iTunes. Now, let's get on with the show.
Hi, Nick. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on the show.
You're welcome. Nick Arquette is an actor, entrepreneur, broker for the film industry, and social good entrepreneur. He founded Walk with Sally in 2005, naming it for his mother, who was diagnosed with breast cancer and who, after many years of treatment, died when Nick was 16. Nick never forgot how challenging and isolating those years were, and so he had searched for mentoring opportunities in the community, only to realize that there really wasn't an organization that was filling that need for children who had experienced a parent with cancer. So after careful research, he launched Walk with Sally and began mentoring a youth who had recently lost his mother to cancer. Nick, could you share with us a little bit about where Walk with Sally has grown from that single mentoring experience?
Yeah, I think it's been a labor of love. I think you described well kind of the trajectory that I had. And I think I started it off with just a volunteer idea, something that felt right, that started to click after that first child. And I continued to ask questions. I continued to get people mentoring me. I continued to look and see, what could this look like? What was out there in the community? Was anybody else doing something similar? And the fact was that I didn't see anything else out there like it. And so from that one little boy, Hassani, in third grade, who had lost his mother recently to cancer, to where we are now with 100 friendships. We're just about to hit 100 friendships. That growth started with just the idea and giving myself permission to try it and see if it would work out, and continued to stay with it. I think that was the other thing, and got better and better as I went.
Great. So it sounds like you've come a long ways.
I mean, I feel like it's been a long way, but I feel like there's always more, and that's the exciting part.
Right. There's always a need to meet. And it sounds like from when we talked earlier that your growth phase really started with the success of your White Night event. I know a lot of organizations struggle to make their events really related to the mission of their organization, but you seem to have done that really well. Could you share a little bit about that?
I think it was important early on for us to find something that really brought the community together so that they could understand and have the messaging. And I think what I saw from watching other charities is that a lot of them had something similar. It was sort of the evening under the stars, or the sort of themed, escape to Monaco, or and a lot of them were based around sort of a hotel and a pretty standard idea. And fundraising obviously is a very serious business, but at the same time, I think that the community coming together was something that I kept looking at. Like, how could I bring something new and fun and different? The idea of having the white night party was really about interjecting our message. My mom, who raised two boys, my brother Alex and myself, early on in her cancer diagnosis, had us very involved in her treatment and what was going on with her. And one of those things was a meditation called white light. And white light is a healing color. I often say to some of the people that call me and share their stories that this healing color, this meditation, was really powerful. And it was something that we did as a family. And I thought, what would it be like if I could incorporate that into an event and have the people there not only wearing white, not understanding why they're wearing white, thinking it's a white party, and then turning it into a meditation that would really galvanize the night. And so you ultimately see this fun, exciting food, music event, but everyone's wearing white. It's a summer party. It makes sense. And then you really hit the message and talk about that meditation and about the impact that cancer's had in the room. And it stops people for the moment and really gets them to think, who in my life do I want to send white light to? Who has passed? Who's going through the experience right now? And you can see just from looking at the audience and getting a sense of who they are that we most of us have been impacted by cancer.
Right. That sounds really powerful. So that event was successful at raising money, and that freed you up to make the decision to shift it from being a volunteer-driven organization to really a full-fledged organization. Was that a difficult decision to make?
I think it came in different phases. I think early on, having the all volunteer, it was inspirational. It was fun to watch. It was mostly, I think most of us were in our late 20s or early 30s, and we were inspired by the idea. After a couple of years, it was really hard to sustain that model. You have people fall in love, move, get job promotions. They're excited about it, and then they're not excited anymore. They do it a couple of years and they burn out, just like every executive director probably listening that knows, how do I continue to maintain some of those incredible volunteers? But when you're talking about growth, especially in the program sector, it's difficult to start showing impact if everyone is working from a volunteer standpoint. I'm a mentor, someone else is a mentor, but we're really not building that program side. And so I knew early on that was the first position that we had to fill. And so we brought in an MFT who ultimately became our program manager. And this was our first attempt at having an office outside of my house and a real program manager, and ultimately was able to start to see that the program and those numbers and those kids were starting to come in. We were starting to find those families. But the next piece, probably the worst, or not the worst, the hardest piece was having enough money to have a real staff in all departments, at least in those initial departments that we needed. I was constantly working on the fundraising side. I had another volunteer working on the day-to-day side, and we had one paid employee. So that event continued to give us the next opportunity. If we could continue to show that we could generate more money, that we could budget for yet another position, for example, the development position. How could we start to raise money outside of just the fundraiser? And how could what does the program need to grow? And so it ultimately came down to the final decision after 10 years, which was 8 years, which was to hire myself as the leader, fully day-to-day managing a team of people. And that was probably the most difficult and also inspirational time for me, because I finally admitted to myself that I was the piece that needed to be there daily in order for this thing to really grow.
Wow. So during that shift, did you run into challenges with your board of directors, or were you able to pretty much keep everybody on board with you?
Well, here's something that I think was interesting. Early on, we managed the board as a fundamentally setting the guidelines and following all the rules of the 501c3. So we ultimately kept it small. And that helped in one way, in the fact that we could be very, very flexible, and we didn't have a lot of people with opinions. We didn't have a huge operating budget, and we managed to really do well with those three people. I think what happened was somewhere around that time that I decided to take over, we realized that everyone on the board, the three of us, myself included, had been doing this already for 7 or 8 years, and that we didn't have a lot of other people helping us to get it to the next level. And so ultimately the decision was made to start to actively look to hiring a board. So it's almost like the board started to grow around the same time that I hired myself and brought in more staff, because it was obvious that if we were going to get to $1 million, that the three of us could no longer do it. And we ended up having one board member leave completely. And so ultimately, we went through the growing pain, but we purposely chose to go small first, and now are building it as the growth is built. And I think that's been a really effective way of approaching this.
Great. So it sounds like it's been really a natural process that didn't have a whole bunch of surprises for you.
For sure. I don't think the board hindered us, but I also don't think it helped. I think there's always that back and forth between what's the right number and are they being effective? Are they trying to get involved in the day to day and certain things that might be a little bit of a distraction, or are they connected and finding new avenues for support? And look, when you've got 6, 7, 8 people in a room who all have different contacts and skill sets, it takes a lot of load off. And now that we're carrying a much bigger load, I think it's been really, really helpful. And I see a lot of boards that are 15, 20, 22 people, and a lot of them aren't really doing anything. So I don't necessarily think I am going to subscribe to sort of the larger, I'd rather have more effective, a tight-knit group that are all really producing results.
Absolutely. I think all of our listeners would agree with that as well. So you're about 10 years in now, and I'm guessing you've had some time to reflect on the things that have worked, the things that haven't. Was there anything that surprised you about the areas that things went really smoothly?
In my 10 years of when I've been growing the organization, something went smoothly. Wow, that is an interesting question. I would say that when I took over, a lot of things happened overnight. We needed to move into new offices. We found a new corporate sponsor that was able to help us reduce down the rent, and we really made that first move. And that first team that I hired are all with me today. And so, as a lot of you know that listen, it's very difficult, obviously, in turnover. And so one of the biggest things I focused on was the experience of the employee and making it a fun, exciting opportunity, a startup mentality that they would want to be at work. They loved what they did, even though we were working inside of the cancer story, that we could still have, our cool moments, I guess is the best way to put it. And to see that original team together still has brought a lot of joy. And I'm not sure how that happened so naturally with the moving and the hiring of 3 key people, and they're still with me today.
That is surprising. I mean, we hear about turnover in the nonprofit world. And if you were intentional about focusing on their experience, then I would think that would have a big impact on their wanting to be part of an adventure and part of something bigger than themselves.
I think you really have to pay attention and see who you're hiring, not just the criteria for the job and the skill set. That's obviously important. But where are they in their lives? What have they been doing prior to this? Where have they talked about what's missing? What are you offering? Have you created a strategy that would bring somebody or give somebody that feeling of wanting to come to work every day? Is there things that we could be doing that are creative? It's even down to having a pretty office. It sounds kind of funny, but it really is about thinking, what would it be like for this person to invite their friend and be excited about, the office, about the work that we're doing, the impact that we're making is also a very big piece of it, because everybody's really bought in to the mission. And then I think you mentioned it. The last one is growth. Do I see future? Do I see future inside of Walk with Sally as an employee? And I think that's something I'm constantly working with them. How do I do it? Through constant communication, reviews, group meetings, creating my vision, creating our corporate culture, and actually having them develop through one of my impact structures. We created our acronym of who we are. And then the retreats. I do a retreat every year and give them an opportunity for 2 days to choose what future looks like for them and for the organization.
Oh, that's fantastic. So that's something that went really well. The converse of that is when things don't go quite so well. And I think an overlooked aspect of learning is what we learn from our failures. So is there a moment of failure that you can look back at, or something that didn't quite work so well?
I would say my probably biggest learning was staying away from areas that I did not have experience in or didn't feel comfortable around. And so early on, for example, the accounting and the processes of of a lot of the budgetary stuff and really understanding what the financial reviews would need to look like, and really those protocols, those day-to-day protocols that when you have $40,000 in the bank and you have 10 families, it's not something you're focused on as much. And so I think understanding and having a learning curve around that. I think also trusting people. I think that, people that you bring into the circle that either you had an expectation for, whether it's a board member or it was a chairperson, is we all are trying to get the best out of these folks and want integrity around everything that they do. And unfortunately, it's just not always the case. And so having to accept that and know that that's always a possibility, especially, and I'm not just talking about, somebody who's paid. I'm talking obviously not someone just who's a volunteer, but someone who's paid. But I think really learning down the road that there were always going to be people who just didn't meet the expectation, and that you have to be able to not let yourself be vulnerable around that. And that if something happens, that you're able to, hit your goals or quickly pivot and make it happen. And so that's been, just dealing with people and their integrity, I would say.
That is a hard aspect of things. What's next for you? What are you most excited about?
I think in terms of my own personal growth, it's what is next as far as being an inspiration to other people that want to start their own nonprofit or are afraid to try new ideas. This social entrepreneurialism is kind of this idea that's a new conversation for some. And it's really about the fact that we can change the world with our ideas and being able to give ourselves permission to say yes. So I think I want to continue on my own journey to spread that and to motivate people through my speaking and the work that we're doing at Walk with Sally to say, if there's people out there that want to create something that will help others, that there's a whole world inside of this it's fun and exciting. I'm also continuing to look at how the public views and has been educated about nonprofits, from the overhead conversation to technology, marketing, social media, looking at really how to educate a new population of donors who understand and believe that nonprofits should have just as many options and choices to keep people working and giving them benefits and having there be a lifestyle that's acceptable for someone who's doing such good work. And I think we want to continue to educate the communities that we serve how important it is to have, a paperless technology, how important it is to offer maybe it's swing days for your staff, that a retreat could pay dividends in keeping someone much longer. So we have to continue to move people in the direction of understanding what really does it mean when you talk about, a 90-10 model or an 80-20 model for an organization. And then I think the last one is the excitement of scaling. When we realized that Walk with Sally had such success and the measured impact that we're having on children, these children have lost a parent or have a parent who's very sick or a sibling who's very sick, and they're trying to be normal kids. And we are bringing friendships into their lives every day. And we have to find those people, and we have to train them, and we have to find the families, and we have to train the families on how to have a successful mentoring program. And that is extremely rewarding. And when it works, it's a beautiful thing. And so I think we want to put it in every city in the country. And as you and I have talked earlier, how do we scale? What is the next step in taking what we've learned and putting it in San Francisco, San Diego, Chicago, New York? And that'll be the most exciting thing is the team. My team currently believes and knows that's kind of our next step.
That does sound exciting. Now, one of the things that you mentioned was wanting to be an inspiration for people. Do you have any closing words to provide inspiration and encouragement for other nonprofit leaders?
I think the first one is to have trust in yourself and be okay with the mistakes you talked about earlier. I think it's okay to make those mistakes. It's important to make those mistakes. I think that there's a lot of opinions out there. There's a lot of people that tell you how you should do it differently. I think you have to continue to listen and be gracious, but by the same token, have some thick skin. I think most people don't appreciate and know what it takes to put on a big event, doesn't know what it takes to run a team of people who are dealing with cancer. So I think it's continuing to have confidence in what you do in your leadership and keep educating yourself. Don't stop looking for ways to grow. I just embarked in a huge technology program with a marketing consultant who was teaching us about how to remessage our program. And we learned so much inside of that and really continue to discuss how do we message what we do? How do we show impact? How do we become more transparent? And there's a lot of people out there that are better at this than I am, and I want to learn from all of them. And so that's, I think, the other thing, just continue to want to learn, be hungry to learn new things. I think some nonprofits are stuck, and there's a lot of reasons why they're stuck, whether it's an older board or mentality or this is the way we've always done it. But I think that's the piece where I see a lot of executive directors feeling extremely corralled because they feel stuck. And I think that if there's a way for them to change and move and grow, there's a lot of exciting things that are happening right now inside of the nonprofit and sector. And so, believe in yourself, continue to learn, and have some thick skin.
Sounds like great advice. Thank you so much, Nick, for joining us today.
Well, it's my pleasure.
And thanks to all our listeners for everything you do to make the world a better place.
Thanks for listening to the Nonprofit Leaders Network podcast with Kirsten Bullock. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll check out our prior episodes and that you'll pass along our web address, nonprofitleadersnetwork.com, to your friends and colleagues in the nonprofit sector.